So we're going to talk about domain and range. So domain and range are words that we give to values and functions. And that actually sounds really complicated, but let's make it just a little bit easier. So I have a couple different scenarios to show you to kind of explain domain and range. So domain are going to be our letters, our envelopes in the mailing system. So domain, we would have a 5 and an 8 for our domain. That's where we start. Like if you think of a mailman starts with holding the letters. And that's what domain is. Domain is where you start, where you live. You've heard people say, this is my domain. It's where you live, it's where you start. And so we start with our mail, our letters. And then we go on to our range. Now our range are where the letters go. The letters go into a mailbox. So our range are the 1 and the 2 of where they go. So in this problem, our domain would be 5 and 8. And our range would be 1 and 2 if you were asked what they were. Let's look at another scenario. In this other scenario, we have a target. So for our domain would be the arrows. That's what we start with. We start with the arrows. So that would be our domain. And our range, if you think about going to a shooting range, our range is what you're trying to get to. It's your target. So whatever values are in your range would be your target. Okay, so now we need to actually look at the math and the actual problems that you're going to see. So here I have 3 scenarios. In this first one, I have a table. Usually X and Y are the variables used, but you can use other variables. And so here I have a table. My domain are my X values. So X is very, very typically your domain, the values you start with. And then range would be your Y values, the values you go to. So for example, if I have a 1, then I'm going to start with 1, and somehow I'm going to get a 6 from that 1. And every time I start with a 1, I am going to get a 6. If I start with a 2, I'm going to get a 7. If I start with a 3, I'm going to get a 10. Another way to look at it is when it's in coordinate pairs here. And I have the exact same problem as this one, it's just written differently. So when I have a 1, I get a 6. When I have a 2, I get a 7. When I have a 3, I get a 10. So my domain are all the X values in these coordinates. My range are all the Y values in these coordinates. Now down here I have an input-output table, and I have a function rule given to me. And I need to figure out what are my X and Y values, what are my domain and range. Now typically, if you're told to fill in an input-output table, you're going to be told what to use for X. So probably in the problem, you just have to read it, and it'll say, use these numbers for X. So there you're going to put them on the left side of the table. Now on the right side of the table, you have to figure out what the range is. What would you get? So the idea is I'm going to take that 0 that I'm given right here, and I'm going to plug it in for X right there and see what I get. So if I plug in 0, I get 2 times 0 plus 5. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 5 gives me 5. So that means my range value will be 5. Then I plug in 1 because I want to try the next value now and see what I get. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 5 gives me 7, so I get a 7 right there. And I keep on going until I've plugged in all the numbers that I'm told to plug into that function rule. So we get 4 plus 5, that gives me 9, so I'll put a 9 right there. And then I'm going to plug in a 3. And 2 times 3 is 6, plus 5 gives me 11. And so now I've filled in my input-output table. My domain is 0, 1, 2, 3. My range is 5, 7, 9, and 11.